and keeping her possessions under the overhang of the youth building. Immediately, this made some people uncomfortable. Some began to ask, "Did you know there was a woman outside there with all of her stuff? What should we do? Should we tell her to leave? What is she doing here anyways?" Her presence was an embarrassment, a source of discomfort, for some possibly scandalous. Most of the youth did not realize whose stuff it was until a few weeks ago when we had a program on hunger. Many times I leave youth group wondering if the youth actually hear what is said or care. And that night, the youth had been talkative and rowdy, but as people began to leave, a group of middle school boys approached the youth director and me and asked if they could give some food to Marie. They found a pack of Oreos and asked her if she would like them. Since that night, high schoolers have talked with Marie, invited her to church lunches, and have actually seen this woman, Marie, who many times they overlooked. Although these kids didn't have huge, expensive gifts, they saw a moment, an opportunity to serve, and shared with Marie the scandalous gift of love and community. Every Sunday, I look forward to seeing her buggy full of boxes and possessions, knowing she is giving us gifts of grace, just as we are for her. In the text, Jesus turns their scolding and judgment upside down, saying, "Let her alone." Instead of repeating their patterns of oppression and admonishment, he asks a question: "Why do you trouble her?" In other words, is this really about the poor? Is this really about money? She has performed a good service for me. To me, this isn't about the money. It's about the service. It is the action, the meaning behind the gift. You will not always have me. There will always be things to do and people to help. But what is crucial at this moment? Jesus is not saying to ignore the poor, but to use the moments you have to serve those around you, including the poor. In this passage, Jesus does not highlight a scarcity in resources, but in time. Our culture breeds a myth of scarcity and teaches us we must live in fear of the scarcity. We use our possessions and fear of scarcity as excuses not to scandalously lavish Jesus with what we have or who we are. We are taught to idolize our possessions, to invest in stocks, not people, to save and withhold our resources instead of freely pouring out. This myth has only grown larger since our economic downturn. We see others in need and fear we will be next. Jesus in this passage does affirm scarcity, but not in money, but in moments of opportunities to use our resources to pour out our love. Weekly, I listen to the podcast, This American Life. And this week's podcast was about a man named Carl King, who spends 21 years trying to prove the innocence of his friend Colin Warner. You see, Colin was accused of murder, and even though he did not witness the shooting and did not know the victim, he was hastily sentenced to 15 years to life in prison for murder. Carl, Colin's childhood best friend, couldn't let it go. He knew his friend was innocent and set out to find proof. Throughout this real-life saga, Carl convinced the killer and the victim's own brother to testify on Colin's behalf. In the end, after 21 years in prison, Colin was set free. At the end of the story, the radio broadcasters say this: "In the end, perhaps the one thing Carl was willing to invest that police and lawyers and the overburdened justice system weren't was time. Nobody wants to see an innocent man in prison, but only Carl King was willing to spend 21 years to get him out." Carl served Colin scandalously. He spent 21 years of his life on a case that others threw away. Just like this woman, Carl takes the moment he is given to serve in a radical way that sets a person free. Is there anyone or anything on whom you would lavish your all, even if it risks scandal? The woman uses the moment she has to anoint Jesus' body for burial, to serve him in abundant ways in his final days. We are not given an infinite amount of time on earth. We are given moments that we can use scolding others in anger or acting out of grace, love, and abundance. Are we doing what we can this moment, breaking open our resources, our very selves, and pouring out our all for Jesus in the faces of those we encounter daily, without expectation of return? Jesus is not a king you pour 2 or 3 drops on. Jesus is the king, the one we should be pouring the entire jars of ourselves into. What is it that prevents you from dumping all the oil out? Is it possibly fear? Fear of everything I will have to give up? Fear that I will be seen as a fool or possibly cause a scandal? Basically, my fear is about me. This woman and Carl were not focused on themselves. Otherwise, she would have kept the money. Otherwise, he would have had a lot of time on his hands. They focused on ministering to others, to the Jesus in their midst, the homeless, the unjustly imprisoned. This woman gives generously and selflessly. Wherever the good news is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in remembrance of her. Wherever people give wholly of themselves for the glory of God, wherever people pour out their false idols to fully worship God, wherever people commit to the scandalous, foolish service of God, this woman's actions live on. It is in this action that this woman is given a voice and identity. So stop, take a deep breath, and plunge into this moment that you are given to scandalously serve. Trust that this world and life is not just about you, but something much larger, something that is worth pouring our entire jars into. Amen.